Welcome to another episode of HSF Conversations, where we discuss theology, spirituality, ministry, and culture. And today, in my opinion, we have a very special guest, my doctoral advisor, Dr. Bruce Little. Dr. Little is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, where he served as full-time faculty from 2001 to 2018, where he was also the director of the Russ Bush Center for Faith and Culture. Dr. Little has given lectures in universities and various venues in America, Central and Eastern Europe, Asia, and Africa on wide-ranging subjects like philosophy, Christian faith and culture, critical thinking, and the problem of evil. He's the author of several books, one of which we'll talk about today, editor of two books, contributed to a number of edited volumes, and is published in numerous academic journals. Prior to his academic ministry, he pastored four churches in New England, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, two of which were church plants. And I believe today he lives up in Maine with his wife, Nancy. Dr. Little, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, Chris, it's my pleasure.
I want us to talk today about your brand new book, not your first book on Francis Schaeffer. You did edit a book way back when on Francis Schaeffer, Mind and Heart for God. But this new book called Why Truth Matters, Francis Schaeffer on True Spirituality, Christ's Lordship, and Inerrancy. And just to start us off, tell us a little bit about your personal interaction with Schaeffer and his works and how you've been involved with that.
Well, thank you, Chris. My interaction with Schaeffer personally is really almost at zero. I did attend a major conference that he did, I think, 3 weeks before he died. And he was traveling to, I think, Christian universities where he was promoting his last book, The Great Evangelical Disaster, which he had written with Lane Dennis. And he was actually dying, Schaeffer was, during that time. As we know, he died of leukemia, not leukemia, but I forget now precisely which it was, what cancer. But anyway, it doesn't matter. So I didn't really ever personally involved with Schaeffer. However, I was introduced to Schaeffer, as I mentioned in the book, very early on in my Christian life, but it was a misrepresentation of Schaeffer. And so that would have been in about mid-1960s. I became a Christian in 1965 at the age of 20. And what I heard about Schaeffer. Yes, I was in a fundamentalist, as they would say, but that word today is meant kind of in a pejorative way, but I'd never thought of it that way. Okay. That doesn't mean they did everything right. But anyway, and I heard Schaeffer, but that was it for me. And I thought, no, I really don't need to know anything more about this gentleman. And then as time went on, and I then in the late 1970s, I attended a college. It was a Christian college, Baptist Christian college, which is no longer in existence. But at the time, it was a good educational institution, great professors. But it was there that I was introduced again to Schaeffer. And it was there that I remember in the one semester, I was introduced to, I had to read The God Who is There. He is there and he is not silent, and Escape from Reason. Now, so those came out the first one came out in 1968. Well, so did Escape from Reason. They were just months apart. So that was my first introduction. But now I'm thinking differently. And I was simply, to say overwhelmed with what I saw, what I read, would be an understatement. And I think maybe the two things that I would say from my interaction with his work early on, from The God Who is There, he says something to this effect, and maybe a direct quote, but I doubt it. That a Christian does not have to commit intellectual suicide, or a person does not need to commit intellectual suicide to be a Christian. Now that struck me as just overwhelmingly refreshing.
Yeah.
In my high school days, before I was saved, I read philosophers, talked with them about a true existentialist who was my friend, my classmate, and none of the philosophers had any answers to
Mm.
any of the questions. And I then moved to just writing poetry. I would go up on Mount Batty, out in Camden, Maine, and I would read Edna St. Vincent Millay,
Mm.
and I would write my own poetry. And that was the thing that kind of filled up my life. Um, I got out of that because of certain things. And then I became a Christian, and I still had these questions. I had these questions down inside. But I became a Christian in a Baptist church and heard the gospel.
Mm.
And then I started thinking about doing, asking some questions because I had questions. And of course, in those days, and in that environment, the idea was if you're asking questions about your Christian faith, that's probably a good indication you're not a Christian.
Mm.
And and if you're asking these questions, it just shows you have very little faith if you are a Christian.
Mm.
And so I just put all those things away, Chris.
Yeah.
I said, you can't answer them. You can't ask them. Those questions have nothing to do with Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when I read The God Who Was There, uh, which was uh, which was written in 1968, um, I was saved in 65. And I'm reading this and I'm thinking, oh my. I felt I never thought I lost my salvation, but I felt like I've been saved all over again.
Mm.
So that was probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I watched the whole film. We had a whole course on the film How Should We Then Live? And the one thing for me that stood out in all of that was this whole idea of unbelievers, much of the world living below the line of despair.
Mm.
And that gave me a whole new view to evangelism.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that I think early on that stood out
Yeah.
in my mind. And then I did a course much later in 1982, 83 maybe. I did a course on Schaeffer. Well, it was not, it was actually 95 because he was supposed to come and teach
Mm.
the course. I was at a Liberty University.
Okay.
So then I got much more in depth in
Yeah.
studying Schaeffer at that time.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned so many people I've talked to who reflect on Schaeffer talk about him being kind of the gateway into a more intellectually rich life. And we might even say, he uses the term of these people that are doorways below the line of despair. He's
Mhm.
kind of a doorway above the line, right? He helps us, see what's good and true and beautiful there. Will you really briefly tell us too? You've worked with the Schaeffer collection, and also, and I don't think a lot of people know this. You actually have done a wide range of interviews with people that knew Schaeffer, which is actually, I think, a treasure trove of
Mhm.
information that really needs to be tapped into.
Yes, I did, Chris. I forget now when that was. It
Mm.
was sometime, I think, probably in the late 2000s, I think. But I traveled to Europe, and also here in the States. Some of the interviews were done over the phone. For example, Os Guinness,
Mm.
his schedule was busy, so we just tucked something in that for him to do. And then there were some other cases, but most of them were done um, face to face. I interviewed the very first student at Liberty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Um, and it's a wide range. And it was so amazing to me as I did this that it almost seemed like these people must have called each other and said, you need to say this when you're interviewing. But they almost all of them said something to this effect. that when Schaeffer talked with a person, it was as if there was no other person in the room or in the world.
Mm,
He just had such a concentration and a true concern
mm,
for people. And as you know, all of these are on the Schaeffer site on the Southeastern website. And also is the interview I did with Jane Stewart Smith.
mm,
And she was an up and coming opera singer.
yeah.
She was loved by the Germans for her doing Wagner. And anyway, she comes to Christ. She gave up that world, and she lived at L'Abri, I think, for almost 40 years.
Wow.
And at one point, she was Schaeffer's international secretary because she spoke several different languages. In opera, she would have to know the languages. And but so she knew Schaeffer extremely well
Yeah.
and just thought the world of him, of course, because he led her to Christ. She had gone, and I don't want to take up too much on this, but she had gone to L'Abri. She was in I think she was in Madrid. I don't know, but she was just having real problems. She wasn't a Christian, and she was struggling with life. And somebody told her, "Why don't you go? There's a little retreat over in the Swiss Alps. It's called L'Abri." And now I don't know if they knew it was a Christian, but she didn't know it was Christian. And she begins to tell them the marvelous story in that tape of how she first came when she came to the door for the first time and knocked on it. And she then had a meal with them. And she said, "I'd never seen Christianity lived out like she saw it at that meal."
Wow.
And eventually she comes to Christ. So yes, there are those. I was in those interviews. I was actually encouraged to do that
Yeah.
by a man by the name of Greg Pritchard.
Oh, yeah.
Greg Greg organized, I forget how many uh, speaking arrangements for Schaeffer.
Mm,
And he has his own testimony and about Schaeffer, who um, went to speak. Schaeffer was they were at one of these meetings, and Schaeffer said, no, Greg asked, would you please go see my sister?
mm,
She's not a Christian and doesn't seem to have much interest. And Schaeffer said no. He said, I can't go. I'm just too tired to go.
mm.
And he got thinking about it. And he decided to go. Well, he led her to Christ that
Wow.
night.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of things, stories after stories,
Yeah.
which just kind of, it highlights, it emphasizes what so many people say.
Yeah.
If you look at the academics, they'll say, like somebody like Os Guinness, he was a great door opener.
Mm,
So many of the intellectual, I say intellectual in the right sense of the word,
mm.
that Schaeffer was a door opener for so many of those people. I'll tell you another person, um, and I have interviewed him as well, but not for Schaeffer, and that is see, when you get old, you can't remember some of these names. But I've interviewed. There was a young. He's well known, and he taught at Duke for a while,
Mm,
as he also taught at, I think, Oxford, Cambridge.
mm.
Split up his time, and he told me that Schaeffer had a great influence on him when he read Schaeffer's little book on art.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it just in so
Yeah.
many areas and so many places.
Yeah. No,
And
absolutely. Well, and you and I have had so many conversations about Schaefer. And I remember so often you would really push me to figure out who Schaefer is the man, right? Not what other people think he is, not what certain interpretations of him, but really try to get to the essence of who the man is himself. And I remember sending an email to Jock McGregor, who I think was at the the L'Abri up in
Minnesota.
Minnesota there. And he said something very similar. He said a lot of times people have an unbalanced view of Schaeffer. Either they think of the Schaeffer of L'Abri, which is part of the story, in his Swiss Knickerbockers and compassion and love, or they think of the Schaeffer who's defending inerrancy in the pro-life movement, kind of in the late 70s, early 80s. But I
Yes.
think now that we're 20, 22 years past his death, there
Mm.
seems to be a handful of kind of misconceptions or misunderstandings of Schaeffer. Why do you think that is? And then I suppose this gets a little bit more towards the thesis of your book.
Mhm.
How can we better understand the real Schaeffer?
Uh, I was going to be flippant tonight. Well, yeah, let's say we'll read the book. No,
Well, they should do that too.
yeah, they can do that too. Um, so, so focus your question for me.
Yeah.
What is it you would like?
Yeah. Maybe more specifically, before we get into some other things, why do you think there is such an unbalanced understanding of who Schaeffer is?
Okay. That's good. That's a good question. Um, I think that most people, and now we're talking about evangelicals.
Yeah.
Okay, so most people, most evangelical Christians who know Schaeffer, aware of him, who have done any reading in Schaeffer. I think most of them all emphasized on how she would then live.
Hmm.
And I think that has been, in my thinking, that has been really kind of abused. And because they didn't understand Schaeffer, they didn't understand, they hadn't read True Spirituality
Hmm.
or some of his other earlier books. Um, and not everybody, if you listen to some of the interviews, not everybody thought that he should even do How She Would Then Live,
Hmm.
that he was trying to up a man by the name of Clark who did History of the Civilizations. Um, but I think that so by looking at and in isolation, looking at How She Would Then Live, I think people got a misunderstanding of how Schaeffer viewed culture.
Yeah.
Now, today we just talk about it. Can an evangelical say anything that if he has to have two sentences, but one of those sentences will have to have the word culture in it?
Yeah.
Well, and you must understand that, even T.S. Eliot
Hmm.
in the late 1930s was very concerned about how the word culture was being used.
Hmm.
Um, he thought it was altogether too ambiguous. And even though he writes a book on culture,
Yeah.
um, what how people would have used culture in the early days, there was a high culture and low culture. And when we talked about high culture, we talked about the arts. Lower culture is mainly what we talk about today, how people think in the everyday life. So, of course, this is only my opinion, and but I think that people then started thinking that this was all Schaeffer was about.
Hmm. Yeah.
So part of that they lost the whole emphasis on inerrancy,
Yeah.
and they confused the lordship of Christ, in my thinking.
Yeah.
I was just doing an interview the other day, and this kind of a question came up. And I'm thinking, somebody said, well, what about this view of there's no separation between the sacred and the secular?
Hmm.
And I think people, evangelicals, miss that. Now, what they missed is they misappropriated it.
Yeah.
What I believe Schaeffer is saying is that it isn't that there's no distinction between sacred and the secular out there in the world,
Right.
but in our thinking, we are not divided.
Right.
And I believe that has led to a lot of misunderstanding and then misappropriation. Um, and I would say for those who've misunderstood it, as I was teaching one day, I was in Europe and a young man, he was a Christian, and I said, he brought this up, no separation between the sacred and the secular. And I said, are you telling me that everything in the world is spiritual? He said, yes. I said, you mean even adultery? He said, yes. Yeah, that shocks us. I think he was on the extreme end of all of that.
Yeah,
And was he just talking? He hadn't thought about it? I don't know. But I think he would have realized that he just said something rather silly
sure.
for a Christian. So I think to me, that's one of the great areas. So
Yeah.
they separated Schaeffer from what he calls the watershed of Christianity,
Mm,
inerrancy, um, true spirituality.
yeah.
It's a moment by moment. And that's how we treat people. That's partly how we treat people. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what brought him to that great point, wasn't it? This debate that he was having with himself
Yeah.
as he watched within the Presbyterian Mission Board. At one point, there was that infighting, and he was concerned that Christians were treating other Christians like unbelievers
Yeah.
in controversy. And that's when he starts this journey, 51 to 52, of this. Yes, you want confrontation,
Mm,
but it's got to be confrontation with love and holiness.
yeah.
And I think we lost that.
Yeah.
I won't mention names, but as I have looked at different theological battles within denominations,
Mm,
they would say that they were confronting, but the truth is they had missed what Schaeffer was talking about.
yeah.
Confrontation, yes, but always done with love.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think those are some areas where
Yeah.
I think if you leave true spirituality and his commitment to inerrancy out of the equation,
Yes.
trying to understand Schaeffer, you're always going to come out lopsided.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that segues really well into the next question because I think you're right. I think what people end up doing is they pull on maybe one strand of Schaefer, but they're not getting the whole picture. So they touch on his conviction of inerrancy, and so they have courage, but they don't have compassion at the same time.
Mhm.
Could you speak then, and again, this is really kind of the heart of your book, about the connection for Schaeffer between spirituality, inerrancy, and Christ's lordship, and why for Schaeffer like those have to be taken together?
Yes. So one of the underlying things that I noticed as I was doing my research and reading books that Schaeffer had written, is this idea that the Christian life, our Christian theology, hangs together as a unit. So as you read Schaeffer, you notice the unity
Mm,
of his thinking. And so the unity was held together by the unity of true spirituality, Christ's lordship, and inerrancy. Um, and if you read his 28 Bible studies, I think it's 28 Bible studies, you will notice there that Schaeffer never tried to get down to the very fine points. He kept a basic view of Christianity, um, and then he tried to do what the medievals did, according to C.S. Lewis. This idea that a place for everything and
mm,
everything in its place within theological system.
yeah.
So when he talks about eschatology, here's a man who's Presbyterian
Mm,
to his death, yet he's pre-trib, premillennial,
yeah.
which is not which is not the common
Yeah.
Presbyterian view of eschatology. Well, how did he come to that? Because Schaeffer hammered this out And this was how he thought you could best have a unity of your theology,
mm,
and particularly uh, the church and eschatology, ecclesiology, pneumatology, and eschatology. And in a letter that I think I maybe quote this letter, in a letter, he says to this lady who has written to him, and he said, "This is how I sense that my theology is most consistent."
mm,
Now, he said others may take a different view, like on the tribulation. But he said, that's my view. He wasn't dogmatic about it.
yeah.
But then he told her, he said, "I encourage you to go listen to my tapes on the book of the Revelation. There are 50 of them." So, but I think that's such a key to understanding Schaeffer.
Yeah.
I have been around good evangelicals who say, "I don't worry about eschatology.
Yeah.
There's too much debate." And I'm just thinking, I get very suspicious when we start talking that way, because eschatology is a part of
Mm,
the Christian faith. And Jesus says, "I'm coming again." Now, I'm not asking people to put a date on it, of course. But there are certain things that seem to me have to be in that package.
yeah.
And Schaeffer arranged them in that way.
Mm,
Uh, and so I think if the one thing that is, to me, so important for Schaeffer is, first of all, the idea that there has to be unity to our thinking,
mm,
a unity to our theology,
yeah.
and all parts of it. But inerrancy was so essential to him because he would say at various times, we need the inerrant text to know that we're not fooling ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, that's precisely right.
Mm,
And he would argue that if you want to deny a part of it,
mm,
then you have to give it all up.
yeah.
Once again, it hangs together as a unity.
Yeah.
And to me, that's something so that's why why he mentions these three things. And so Christ's Lordship is a part of that information we get from an inerrant text, so that we know we're not fooling ourselves. We live under the authority of one.
Mm,
Well, how do we know we live under the authority of one? Well, we know because the scriptures teach it. And as you know, he was extremely concerned about the true spirituality side of things, because he thought this moment by moment living was the only way the Christian life could be lived successfully. Now, I need to make a little parenthesis here. Schaeffer never said that if you don't live by moment, you're not a Christian. He would just say you are not knowing the full joys of living as a disciple of Jesus.
yeah.
But he didn't make it a test for salvation. But this idea of moment by moment, and I have had others speak to me since they've read the book, saying this is the most amazing thing
Mm,
that somehow I have missed
yeah.
throughout. So people weren't denying it.
Mm,
And I think, Tris, and see, when you get to be an old man, and I became a Christian in 1965. So I've seen a lot.
mm,
35 for what? 35, 60 years plus, somewhere around there. So when you look at it, I see day by day so much of the world and the world's way of managing the Christian life. I can understand why it takes people up short a little bit
yeah.
when they read this moment by moment, because this is something quite absent, I think.
Yeah.
Not intentionally. I'm not, and I never judge motives. That's a risky business.
Mm,
I just think that Christian leaders in particular have get caught up uh, in good motives,
Yeah.
but they got caught up and they wanted to do something for Jesus and they wanted to be successful.
Yeah.
And how is it going to be successful? Well, we just work it out this way.
Mm.
And we learn that from the world of business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think Schaeffer would talk about that you don't do the work of God according to the ways of men. He would say that in several times. So true spirituality, that the Christian is to live under the direction of the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
Is it that we do it perfectly? No. Uh, but that is how it is to be lived.
Yeah.
So you get those three, you can't pull them apart.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. I genuinely think that if we take Schaeffer, I know he's not just an apologist, but if we
Yeah.
think about his apologetic approach, that he predicates it on true spirituality and inerrancy and looking towards the Lordship of Christ. I mean that those three ingredients, I think, really helps solve kind of what we see in what the problems we see in a lot of like modern day apologetics. A lot of it's not overly concerned with inerrancy, or it's not predicated on a true spirituality, which I think is a huge component. But both of those are absolutely necessary. So I think you're really touching on something there. Um, Coming kind of close to our last couple of questions here, uh, I do want you to talk a little bit about why Scripture. You've touched on this a little bit already, but why Scripture is so important to Schaeffer. Somebody might read The Great Evangelical Disaster and they might think, oh, here's a guy he's sounding an alarm, but maybe he's worried for nothing. He keeps talking about inerrancy as this watershed moment. He talks about the obedience to inerrancy. So why do you think it is, maybe not only his last book, but all throughout his life, why is it so central to Schaeffer's thought?
Hmm. Well, I come back to that one, that the little statement he makes. He made it as early as 1965 when he was at uh, giving his talks at Wheaton College, and he makes it several times, and that is, it's the only way that we can know that we're not fooling ourselves.
Mm,
Um, because if we're going to stand up as Schaeffer tried to do with courage and be able to say, this is right and this is wrong. This is what we are to do. This is what we're not to do. But if you don't have an inerrant text, then how would you know that that's exactly what we're being told?
right.
Well, there isn't way for that. So I think that for Schaeffer, if you read the Tapestry, for example,
Mm,
you realize that Schaeffer was early on in his Christian life. Inerrancy was a big issue for him.
mm,
Um, so when he's going to seminary, that's a big issue.
yeah.
And then, of course, in the 1940s, when he goes to, he finally, he takes this 1947. He takes his trip to Europe, 2 years after the end of World War II in Europe. What a mess things were. But when he finally goes back, the mission board sends him back and said, yes, they finally settled. One of the first people that he tries to arrange audience with is Karl Barth.
Hmm.
And what was Karl Barth's problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
And Karl Barth's problem was with inerrancy
Yeah.
uh, and how we interpret the Bible. So this brings me, yes, it was always an issue very important to Schaeffer. But when he goes to Europe, and this, I know we had a discussion at some time, difference between Schaeffer and Lewis.
Mm,
But when Schaeffer goes to Europe, but before he goes to Europe, he's writing articles
yeah.
on the new modernity.
Yeah. Right.
It was neo-orthodoxy,
Yeah.
what we would come to be known as. And he's talking about this. And this is the issue with him as he goes and tries to talk with Karl Barth. And we have the letters between them. And just to say, put it mildly, Karl Barth was not impressed.
No, not at all.
He was just simply not impressed. And he looked at Schaeffer and his friends who came to visit Karl Barth, and he looks at them as being the fundamentalist popes telling everybody else how to believe.
Yeah.
Well, they were just focusing on this issue of the Bible, that is an objective truth, and realize that Schaeffer was battling, as it were, with neo-orthodoxy. But that would have been what we would have called it going on in the religious world. But the universities in Europe at that time are just seriously infected. Well, it's more than infected. They're taken over by existentialism.
Yeah.
So throughout this, Schaeffer's writings, you hear him talking about true truth. Well, what is that? That's another way of saying inerrancy.
Yeah.
True truth. You've got something here that you can stand on. So Schaeffer that is so important to Schaeffer. He realizes that how important this is. Now, so in 1985, the book comes out.
Yeah.
And his book on the Great Evangelical Disaster. And where does it all start? It starts with giving up or becoming soft on inerrancy.
That's right.
So now he sees this is where it ends. Now, I remember of being in those debates back in the 70s, when what we call new evangelicalism.
Yeah.
When this kind of soft on inerrancy, so that we stayed in with these groups that were moving liberal, but we stayed in them. The idea was you stay there, and so you can have something to say. But the truth of the matter is, by the time you get there, how you've gotten there, you've got nothing left to say.
Yeah.
And so Schaeffer would think inerrancy is so important, because without it, we really don't have anything to say.
Yeah.
It's just my opinion against yours.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very helpful. Let me kind of bring it to a close with one last question. The final chapter in your book, without getting too specific, which I think is appropriate, you try to give some application. Like I said earlier, we're 40 plus years after Schaeffer, but I think his works, in my opinion, is as relevant as ever. Um, so what are some modern applications for this idea of being committed to inerrancy, the Lordship of Christ, and true spirituality kind of all at the same time?
Mm. Well, I think let's start with inerrancy. I think that some of the things that we talked about prior to doing the interview today, how so much of naturalism in its different forms has made its way into the evangelical community, and it has done it in such a way that it makes it very easy to accept, because it gives you the secret to having successful ministry. And though people will continue to sign their doctrinal statements, I believe in inerrancy, but little by little, as you are taking in some of the methodology of the world, you can still hold on, you still sign, you still believe, you hold to inerrancy. But the truth of the matter is, while you hold it in one hand, I don't want to say you're denying it,
Yeah.
but you're softening it
Sure.
on the other hand.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. Um, from one who's kind of stepped back now and looking at things as I've watched evangelicalism over the last 60 years of my life, I always believed in inerrancy. I didn't realize how important it was,
Yeah.
particularly as I've watched, oh, let's say the last 25 years.
Yeah.
Good people who mean the best, but they don't see the implications of what inerrancy would require from them.
Yes.
Then true spirituality. Uh, just let's say in our witnessing,
Mm.
without true spirituality, I think a great mess can be made out of Schaeffer's apologetics.
Yeah.
That is what most people took away from Schaeffer's apologetics. He says, I have no methodology. Whatever works with the person in front of me. But what most people have taken away from Schaeffer's writings on apologetics is his view or his approach called taking off the roof.
Yeah.
And in the book, I give a quote from Schaeffer where he says, even in the last days that he was at Liberty, where they still saw people coming who saw taking off the roof as being something to do mechanically.
Yeah.
So there you have, seems to me to be a legitimate approach, but yet without true spirituality, you can see how ugly it can get.
Yeah.
Totally devoid of the Spirit of God, the love of God.
Yeah.
So I think that those two together, putting together his apologetics, that people cannot just make this a mechanical thing.
Right.
And neither can they make Christian life a mechanical thing. I saw a book the other day, How to Become a Christian in 7 Days.
Mm.
That's frightening.
Yeah.
That's frightening that it's being promoted
Yeah.
on the Christian community, and so we're so naturalistically inclined that we think, boy, we want to see people come to Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Yeah.
do you think there is a way? Should the Spirit of God be involved in this in any way? Not just in the working in the heart of the individual with whom I'm speaking, but also influencing how I am
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
in that day. So
Yeah. I don't want to put you on the spot here, but you told me a story, and I think it's in the book. Forgive me if I'm getting the facts wrong. I think Schaefer is maybe at Oxford or he's at a college, and there's a young man that says something like, "It seems like we're losing the fight."
yeah.
Could you just share a little bit of like how Schaefer responds to that?
Yes. Actually it was at this meeting that I saw
Okay.
that I was at in 1985, 3 weeks before Schaefer dies.
Hmm.
He's promoting How Should We Then Live? Excuse me. He's promoting The Great Evangelical Disaster. This is when a young man stands up and asks, Dr. Schaefer, it seems like the church is in the 10th round, bloody and beaten on his knees. Is there any hope that we can win?
Hmm.
And I can see Schaefer pull the mic to his face, to his lips. He was very weak. He
Yeah.
was sitting down, and he said something on that. I don't think it's my imposing something on what he said, but something like my son, but the rest of it is right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Almost verbatim. He said, if you do it to win, we've lost already
Hmm.
because we do not do it to win. We do it because our risen Lord has commanded us.
Amen. Yeah.
Now, Schaefer wasn't saying that we didn't want to win.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not my goal.
Yeah.
My goal is to be faithful to the Christ who
Mm.
saved me and has called me to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lowe. This has genuinely been a treat. I mean, I always enjoy talking to you, but love talking about these matters and thinking about it. And it's very much been an encouragement. Want to thank our listeners for listening to this. But again, thank you so much for taking your time to be part of this.
Well, it's my pleasure. Anytime I get to talk about Schaeffer,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, that's always a great pleasure for me.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank
thank you for asking me and for doing this.
Oh, of course. Before we leave, last thing I want to mention is if our listeners haven't already, make sure to buy a copy of your book. I mean, and I'm not just saying this. I think genuinely, it it's the book to help figure out Schaefer the man, to really kind of connect the dots on a lot of it. So, thank you again, and we'll catch you next time on HSF Conversations.
Okay, thank you.